Chapter 4. Learning from the Field, Climate Change and Gender Action Generator, Gen. D. Era. C. 4.1. 4 types of social action according to Weber. The theory of social action was developed by the German sociologist Max Weber, who with this theory sought to highlight the importance of human behavior in its instrumentally rational cause and effect relationship in the social sphere. According to Max Weber, human beings adapt their actions according to social contexts and how these actions affect the behavior of others. 4 types of social action according to Max Weber. 1. Traditional social action, custom. They are actions that are the result of traditions and customs and are performed in certain situations. Example of traditional social action. Having lunch with the family every Sunday. Traditional actions can become a cultural reference. Tradition is divided into 2 subgroups, customs and habits. A custom is a family practice, usually performed and popularized within the culture. Habits, on the other hand, can endure from generation to generation. A habit is something that is learned little by little, and sometimes it is something that becomes normalized in everyday life and even becomes attached to a person's personality. 2. Affective social action. Also known as emotional action, where humans act impulsively and do not necessarily think about the consequences. Example of affective social action. Crying at a victory or weeping at a funeral are affective social actions. This social action is divided into 2 subgroups, uncontrolled reaction and emotional tension. In the uncontrolled reaction, the person takes less account of the feelings of others and puts the person's own feelings as the main focus. Emotional tension is the frustration a person may have at not fulfilling his or her aspirations, and it is then that inattention generates dissatisfaction. 3. Rational social action with values. This social action, rational action, is characterized by moral or ethical principles that are applied collectively for the good of society. Rational action is therefore guided by collective ideology or ethics. Example of rational social action with values. Religion. 4. Rational instrumental social action. These are actions that are carried out in order to achieve a specific result. Example of rational instrumental social action. Natalia is 19 years old and wants to study medicine. However, she is aware that she has to take a rigorous exam to be able to go to university and study what she wants to study. This exam makes Natalia study every day to pass the exam and finally study medicine. If we consider this example from everyday life, we can understand Natalia's desire to achieve her goal and what she has to do to achieve it. Natalia then applies social instrumental social action because each step she takes to achieve her goal will bring a positive or negative consequence depending on how she carries out the process. In this case, her process is one of discipline and study. In other words, and with another practical example from the 3rd sector, to illustrate these different types of action, consider someone who wants to volunteer in terms of these 4 ideal types. Traditionally, one can do it because one's grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles have also done it. They want to carry on the family tradition and continue the volunteer activity as well. When related effectively, one can volunteer just because one enjoys helping. You just love to do it. With rational social reasons, one may attend such activities because it is part of one's ethical, or even religious, duty and belief that everyone should contribute to society. Therefore, this person attends for that reason alone. Finally, one may volunteer because one may want an amazing job in the future, and to get that job, one needs experience in the field or practical skills that one cannot otherwise acquire prior to employment, etc. Rational instrumental. Influence of social action. For Max Weber, social action is influenced by the past, the present, and the future. Therefore, social action as a result undergoes changes of some kind over time. Social action may be constantly evolving as times change and human behavior may develop, improve, modify, or change. Social action cannot be isolated as it needs the behavior of human beings and how they can influence the behavior of other people within their social structure in a particular way. Criteria for the social character of the action. People must take into account the behavior and existence of others as their own. Intention that is directed at other people. Meaning the subject's action must have a symbolic meaning. People's behavior in a social action is influenced by their perception of the meaning of the action of others and of their own action. Max Weber and Miles Durkheim. For Max Weber, social action has a subjective definition, whereas for Weil-Durkheim social action is objective. Differences between social action and social fact. To understand the difference between these two theories, both of which are of great importance in sociology, one must first understand what the social fact theory, developed by Weil-Durkheim, a French sociologist and philosopher, is. Social facts involve the behavior, the way of seeing, thinking, acting, and feeling that is external to consciousness. This, in a social group, may or may not be respected and may or may not be shared. This means that the social fact is the way of feeling and living on the outside, thus orienting their behavior. For Weil-Durkheim, the social fact is constituted by cultural values that mold subjects to act in a certain way. Thus, it assimilates its exterior and can adapt it to its behavior, consciously or unconsciously transforming it to act and think in a certain way. Social facts are imposed, whether people like it or not. On the other hand, Max Weber, with his theory of social action, explains that people's behavior is constructed through the interaction of one or more subjects who modify their behavior influenced by the other. Weber argued that before the cause of an action could be determined, the meaning that the individual assigned to it had to be understood. He distinguished between two types of understanding. He first referred to aktuelles Verstehen, or understanding by direct observation, where you simply observe what people do. For example, you can observe someone chopping wood, or you can even determine, with reasonable certainty, someone's emotional state from their body language or facial expression. However, observational understanding alone is not sufficient to explain social action. The second type of understanding is erklärendes Verstehen, or empathic understanding, in which sociologists must try to understand the meaning of an act in terms of the motives behind it. This kind of understanding would require you to find out why someone is chopping wood. Are they doing it because they need the wood? Are they simply clearing a forest as part of their job? Etc. To achieve this, Weber argued that you had to put yourself in the shoes of the people doing the activity. 4.2. International commitments to gender equality and the environment. Despite women's leadership in the grassroots climate movement and their particular vulnerability to climate change, gender has not yet been adequately integrated into climate plans, policies, and strategies. The SDG Gender Index 2022, published by Equal Measures 2030, a leading global partnership on accountability for gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, provides a snapshot of where the world stands on the vision of gender equality included in the 2030 Agenda. The results of the index are staggering. Insufficient progress has been made on gender equality globally between 2015 and 2020. Of the 17 SDGs, Goal 13, climate action, was one of the 3 goals with the lowest score. Moreover, even high-performing countries in the index were found to have weaknesses in gender equality under SDG 13. There is an urgent need to increase women's leadership and decision-making power in the climate space. Research shows that when women are adequately represented, there is a positive impact on sustainable natural resource management and climate change adaptation efforts, including the reservation of protected areas and the ratification of multilateral environmental agreements. The nexus between climate and gender equality is receiving renewed attention and focus at the international level. Both the Equality Generation Forum and the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, which this year considered the theme of gender equality in the context of climate change, are both raising the intersections and urgency of addressing the gender dimensions of climate, which this year considered the theme of gender equality in the context of climate change, are elevating the intersections and urgency of addressing the gender dimensions of climate. We must maintain this momentum and continue to push for greater recognition, participation, and funding in the global climate action movement for girls and women around the world. Indeed, we will be able to secure the lasting and transformative change our planet so desperately needs only when we fully take into account and include all people who call it home. Exemplary woman in the field of climate action, Christiana Figueres. After running a climate change, non-profit organization for 8 years, Christiana Figueres assumed leadership of the UNFCCC, the body responsible for international climate change negotiations, at the agency's lowest point. Just 5 months earlier, the world had failed to reach an agreement at the 2009 Copenhagen summit. She injected a unique sense of optimism, trying to get the talks out of what she calls the political dustbin. It worked. Figueres successfully led world leaders to reach the Paris Agreement in 2015. Together with other women involved in the negotiations, figures managed to shed important light on the gender dimension of climate change. 4.3. Practical ways to address gender inequality in decision-making and action planning. Third sector entities, activist and social movements are not spaces free of inequality and sexist violence. On the contrary, these phenomena are present there as in any other sphere of society, and are not related to romantic relationships only. Indeed, when looking at the following diagram, let's try to think of any relationships, whether within an NGO, professional ones, activist ones, within our group dynamics, etc. Even very subtle micro-machismos or mansplaining gradually undermine and reinforce the order established by the patriarchal system, and are often difficult to combat due to the difficulty of identifying them, both by those who exercise them and by those who suffer from them. Without the pretense of victimizing, if we want a new world with new logics, we cannot replicate and repeat the old systems we carry inside. Without personal work and a previous questioning of the position we occupy in the world, of all the privileges that we have, also within an NGO, it would be difficult for us to create those new worlds. We have to identify violence in order to eradicate it, and doing it collectively can be very enriching. Gender inequality, or even gender-based violence, within social movements. Examples: Spanish Foundation of the Commons proposes such typology of gender violence. Feminization of the tasks necessary for the correct life and daily functioning of the NGO or the group, cooking, shopping, cleaning, etc., and of emotional support. Planification of activist actions without addressing the fact who cares for minors and or people in a situation of dependency. Violent ones, insinuations or verbal harassment. Use of the festive space of the NGOs and groups to sexually assault. Negation of the aggressions and questioning of the victims. Revictimization for the mismanagement of sexual violence within the group. Organizational ones. Abuse of power by cis men. Mostly, male turns to speak. Interruptions of women and non-binary people's turns. Mansplaining, repeating the same idea that a female or non-binary colleague has previously said. Androcentric press releases, written in a non-inclusive language. Social networks as spheres where macho logics and attitudes rule. Paternalism, condescension, invisibilization, and lack of recognition of the work and opinions of female or non-binary colleagues. Negation and criticism of non-mixed spaces for women, lesbians and transgender people. Overrepresentation of cis men among NGOs' presidents or spokespersons and spaces for visibility, actions, demonstrations or facilitation of assemblies. Schedules of assemblies and actions that are incompatible with caring. Triple working day, work, home and activism. Consequences of pointing towards inequality and violence. Slowness, aggressiveness, and opacity in the processes of denunciation in the collective. Questioning, defaming and discrediting victims or those who publicly denounce violence. Making aggression a problem of different opinions. Isolation and loneliness of the victims. Gaslighting. Patriarchalitest. Another interesting tool offered by a Spanish NGO Ecologistas en Acción Ecologists in Action is called Patriarchalitest and helps to identify machist dynamics within an organization in an informal, funny way. Gender Assessment and Monitoring of Mitigation and Adaptation, GAMMA. Another tool, the Gender Assessment and Monitoring of Mitigation and Adaptation, GAMMA, is a methodology that examines adaptation and mitigation policies for their gender responsiveness. It seeks to identify possible gender entry points and develop recommendations for interventions needed to address gender gaps in climate governance, planning, priorities, policies, and measures. The assessment involves several steps and covers institutional setting and procedures, the complete range of climate policies, and an in-depth analysis of the gender impacts of relevant measures on climate change. Initially, it was created to adapt to a city's planning and management, but we present here a simplified version of the process so that it can be of inspiration in the third sector too. We use the guidelines from Gender CC Women for Climate Justice, and their full guide can be accessed here. 1. Preparation. Gain an overview of your region / town / part of the city / entity / institution climate action and institutional setting. 2. GAMMAI. Identify institutional capacities and policy frameworks, key stakeholder interviews. Some examples of indicators to be used can be found here. 3. GenerA. I make a qualitative assessment of climate action portfolio for gaps from a gender perspective. 4. GenerAMAI. I make a gender analysis of key policies and measures, using an in-depth questionnaire about relevant policies. 5. Summarize gaps and findings and prepare an assessment report. 6. Translate the findings into policy recommendations. G. In the form of a policy brief, consult the draft with community stakeholders. 7. Develop and implement an outreach strategy to get the message through to civil society and policymakers. 8. Monitoring change. Have policy recommendations contributed to or promoted transformations? Case study. Poland. According to the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, a report from Poland's Institute of Policy Affairs suggests that the belief that women dominate the not-for-profit third sector is not altogether true. The findings show that non-profit organizations do have a high percentage of women employees and volunteers, but men are more likely to be in key management positions. The data also show that negative phenomena such as the glass escalator and the sticky floor may be a factor in non-governmental organizations. Background. The findings of a policy paper on equal opportunities for women and men published by Poland's Institute of Policy Affairs, ISP, highlight the role of women in non-governmental organizations. NGOs. The paper is based on data gathered from surveys conducted in 2010 and 2011 by the GenerA Association and is part of a broader project, Partnership Equal Chances for Men and Women, implemented by the ISP to address problems of gender inequality in the media, politics, family, labor market, and third sector organizations. A feminist sector? The non-governmental sector is commonly considered as strongly feminist, but this perception is not entirely supported by the available data. It is certainly true that a higher percentage of women work in the sector overall. In 2010, women made up 60% of all those working in the sector. When sport associations were excluded from the figures, the proportion of women employed in the third sector was 70%. When only workers on temporary contracts, as well as permanent contracts, were taken into consideration, the proportion of women workers was 62%. According to other source, there may be at least 4 reasons for these figures. Prazuoka, 2012. NGOs often guarantee flexible forms of employment, allowing employees to combine work with family life. B. Salaries are lower than in the private sector, and women in Poland generally have lower pay expectations than men. C. The jobs offered are often considered to be feminist jobs such as accounting and office work. D. Work in some types of organization may be perceived as more socially acceptable for women, such as childcare and caring for elderly. The findings of the policy paper show that among external volunteers, often referred to as non-members, there were more women than men. This could be connected to the fact that sports associations are very widespread in Poland and tend to be dominated by men, and there is a tradition of taking up membership of a sports association rather than just being an external volunteer. There certainly seems to be more willingness among women to become an employee of a third sector organization. However, the share of women among members was only 40%, and women made up only 42% of the management boards of third sector organizations. It should be emphasized that the median share of women's representation on management boards has improved in comparison to previous years. In 2006, a third of management board positions were filled by women, and the 2010 figures show that this has risen to just over 40%. Glass escalator and sticky floor effects in third sector. According to the paper, the imbalance between the number of women in management and among employees suggests that the so-called glass escalator effect may be operating. In other words, there may be a tendency to promote men over women. This, however, needs further research to confirm the findings. A further factor is that women tend to be employed in jobs not demanding any qualifications and with few prospects for promotion, working as cleaning staff, assistants, or office workers. This may indicate that another discriminatory mechanism may be involved, the so-called sticky floors. There is no evidence to suggest that there is a glass ceiling effect, the invisible barrier to the promotion of women to the highest positions. According to the authors of the project, given the framework within which their paper was prepared, third sector organizations are not aware of the problems of discrimination against women. Neither do the organizations appear to be open to discussing the issues. There may be 2 reasons for that. It may be that they are convinced that the situation is better than in the private sector and has been constantly improving, and they may also feel that they have more important matters to deal with. Yet the third sector should pay particular attention to gender equality, since it is the area where civic rights are realized. The weak presence of discourse on that subject seems worrying. Did you know? Apart from the glass ceiling and glass escalator effects described above, there is also a glass cliff one. What is it? 4.4. Why a gender-sensitive approach in youth, work and environmental education matters. The social discourse dissociated from the patriarchal order drags us all along with it because it marks the policies that organize our life in society and, more importantly, it determines the subjectivity of those who are socialized in its dynamics. Hence, we consider that feminist critique, or whatever one wants to call a social critique that questions the complexity of the foundations of culture and does not deny the value of emotions, is more necessary today than ever before because it shows that the social discourse considered to be true does not correspond to the truth. The feminist movement arose when women began to claim that we needed to put into practice the supposed universality of the principles of justice and equality, and that it would include women in the democratic game. The recognition of the inconsistency between the theory of discourse and its practical application has caused efforts to legislate and implement institutional measures to promote equal rights for all members of society. The reason for this is, first of all, that the majority of society, men and women, still embody, to varying degrees and sometimes without being aware that they do so, the traditional gender identities. Ecofeminism. The link between ecology and feminism and their potential dialogue has to do with the question of what sustains life. And if we ask ourselves what sustains life, we have to recognize that we are radically dependent beings on a planet Earth that has physical limits, and we are also dependent on those deep-seated goods on Earth that are not manufactured or controlled at will by the humans. This means that there is no economy, no technology, no politics, no society without nature. But on the other hand, human beings also live incarnated in bodies that are vulnerable, in bodies that are finite, in bodies that have to be cared for throughout their lives and especially in some moments of the life cycle, such as childhood, old age, moments of illness or a lifetime, some cases of functional diversity. What happens is that throughout all of history, those who have taken care of the most vulnerable bodies have been and are women, and not because they are better genetically endowed to do so, but because we live in societies that distribute unfreely, in the moment of birth, in which you are assigned a certain sex, the task of care. When we consider what it is that sustains life, we directly come across the demands and struggles that have historically been maintained, for much longer, by the feminist movement in its eagerness to distribute, to defeminist care, to make the whole group co-responsible of the daily and generational reproduction of the life of human beings and the claims of environmentalism. To sum up, we recall the United Nations, 2023, reminder of 5 compelling reasons why women and girls are essential for climate action. Reason 1. Climate action requires 100% of the population. Half of the world's population is made up of women and girls, but they are often left out of the conversation when it comes to climate change. Indigenous women, in particular, have been at the forefront of environmental conservation and possess invaluable knowledge and experience that can help increase resilience and reduce greenhouse gases. Including more women in climate action will help create a more sustainable and equitable future for all. Reason 2. Empowering women means better climate solutions. As we saw before, women make up almost half of the agricultural workforce in developing countries. When given the same access to resources as men, women can increase their agricultural yields by 20 to 30%, according to the UN. Education among women and girls has far-reaching benefits for communities and countries. In fact, as we saw at the beginning of this guide, recent research confirmed that countries with a high representation of women in parliament are more likely to ratify international environmental treaties. Reason 3. Women are key to building climate resilience in communities. When it comes to building climate resilience in communities, it is crucial to involve women. In fact, the UN reports that communities are more successful in resilience and capacity-building strategies when women are part of the planning process. In addition, women are often the first to respond to natural disasters, take the lead in disaster risk reduction, and contribute to post-recovery by addressing the early recovery needs of their families and strengthening community building. Reason 4. Climate change affects us all, but not the same. Climate change affects everyone, but not everyone equally. It is well established that climate change has a greater impact on the most vulnerable people in the world, whether in developed or developing countries, and exacerbates existing inequalities. Reason 5. Countries recognize the importance of including a gender perspective in climate planning. The good news is that women and girls are increasingly empowered to contribute to and benefit from climate action. Within the UN climate change process, many countries have shared how they are integrating a gender perspective in different priority sectors within their national climate action plans. However, we must remember that there is still much to be done, and that third sector entities and youth workers in general play a huge role in this ongoing process of education and awareness raising. Exemplary woman in the field of climate action, Ruth Nyambura. Ruth Nyambura, of the African Eco-Feminist Collective, draws on radical and African feminist traditions to critique power, question multinational capitalism, and re-envision a more equitable world. With the Global Forest Coalition, GFC, she launched the Our Nature Is Not Your Solution, with which she criticizes the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, for allowing environmentally damaging monoculture tree plantations to be classified as planted forests. She wants to draw attention to how the environment and biodiversity are being privatized. She also highlights the perspectives and regenerative solutions of indigenous peoples, local communities, and women who are on the front lines of the current biodiversity and climate crises. She collaborates with such organizations as the African Women Unite Against Destructive Resource Extraction, Women that campaigns against the devastation of the extractive industries. Exemplary woman in the field of climate action, Yayo Herrero. On a planet whose limits have already been exceeded, the decrease in the material sphere of the global economy is not so much an option as an inescapable fact. Yayo Herrero, Ecofeminism as a Tool for Transformation. See TXT Magazine, 2018. Yayo is anthropologist, agricultural engineer, social educator, and one of the main voices of European ecofeminism. She is currently a professor of environmental education and sustainable development at the UNESCO chair at UNED. Her research career has focused on criticizing the capitalist development and production model as a threat to the planet and life, research that she combines with activism. She was the state coordinator of the Ecologistas ENACN platform and director of the NGO FUHAM. There is no economy, no technology, no politics, no society without nature and care. Yayo Herrero. Exemplary woman in the field of climate action, Greta Thunberg. In 2018, Greta Thunberg, then 15, started a school strike in Sweden to draw attention to the climate crisis, and her message has since spread, even though she avoids air travel because of its high carbon emissions. Young people around the world have followed suit, striking and marching to make it clear to adults and decision makers that this is a real emergency. We are children saying, why should we care about our future when no one else is doing it? And why should we bother to learn facts when facts don't matter in this society? When kids say something like that, I think adults feel really bad, Thunberg told TIME in April. In late August, he landed in the US after a 15-day boat trip across the Atlantic and has plans for a months-long tour of the Americas with a zero-carbon footprint. This is an existential crisis that is going to affect our entire civilization, the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced, he says. I don't plan to stop this movement, and I don't think anyone else will. 4.5 Case Studies. Madre Tierra. Madre Tierra supports the creation of solidarity microcredit funds between women to improve their housing and access to drinking water. The first phase of the project presents housing improvement processes, like access to tap water and internal electricity, representing an improvement in the living conditions and tasks performed by women such as care and domestic work. The habitat improvement is expected to empower women to identify gender inequities and, through gender-specific workshops, incorporate discussions on stereotypes, violence, and feminism. The project benefits 300 people, including women and their families. Climate impact. The project represents a tangential adaptation measure to climate impact with water-saving actions. House improvements include installation of home water connections and rainwater tanks, promoting a more efficient use of the water network and collecting rainwater to enable substantial water savings. The improvements in the housing conditions allowed for a more adequate thermal protection and a better access to sanitary conditions to the families. Gender impact. The project ensures safer homes. Access to drinking water inside the home means that women do not have to go outside to get the resource. And indoor electricity generates more safety. It also improves women's and families' living conditions, especially as it reduces the time spent on cooking and cleaning. Women's participation in the decisions was sought during each stage of the project, making their opinions more visible to their partners and communities. Population, health, and environment. PHE approach in climate change policies. The Philippines experience. P.A.T.H. Foundation Philippines, Inc. PFPI and Arrow implemented the Population, Health and Environment and Climate Change Project in the Philippines' Verde Island Passage. Verde Island is a key marine biodiversity area threatened by overfishing, pollution, and climate change. The goal of the project is to mainstream sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, into climate change policy and practice. The project applied a developmental approach, PHE, that forges multi-sectoral collaboration and partnership, employs multiple interventions to address SRHR needs, family planning, biodiversity loss, poor health and food insecurity to foster climate, resilient communities. Climate impact. Women play a critical role in achieving climate change resilience. PFPEI scoping study results show that women are central to conceiving and implementing solutions. Planning their families, managing the resources, and being pro-health and pro-environment advocates in their own communities will help to build resilience to climate change, all of which will contribute to a better future for their children. The women also highlighted that collaboration and agreements between communities will create synergy in community actions and results. Gender impact. At the core of the population, health, environment and climate change nexus is the burden on the woman. Fishing communities in the Verde Islands experience declining fish catch, depleting potable water and poor health. Lack of livelihood options, loss of family income and food insecurity drive women to engage in multiple jobs and to work longer hours to supplement the family's income. The project addresses women's needs and rights as well as family planning in a participatory approach, helping them in identifying coping strategies. Practical exercise for young people. 8. People from another planet. Objectives. 1. To challenge assumptions that people make about one another and the nature of power. Time, 45-60 minutes. Materials, chairs, simple food, biscuits, bread, crackers, glasses of water. Facilitators' notes. 1. Divide the group in two. One half stay in the room, and the other half leave the room while directions are given. 2. The facilitator explains to the group remaining that they are people from another planet welcoming a delegation from Earth. The alien group has their own set of customs, which the facilitator should explain. They do not use words to communicate, so when the humans come in, they will be welcomed without words. 2 members of the group should be seated in chairs, the rest will be on the floor. The people in the chairs are not holy and therefore are not allowed to touch Mother Earth, which is recognized as sacred. Likewise, only the holy people are allowed to touch the food and drink and must give it to the people in the chairs. When the people in the chairs wish to honor Mother Earth, they put their hands on the heads of those on the ground. 3. The facilitator invites the remaining participants to rejoin the group and explains that they are a human delegation visiting a new planet. They are being welcomed by an alien delegation who have organized this ceremony. 4. The facilitator should not become involved in the role play. After 5 to 10 minutes, the facilitator declares the end of the activity. Note, it is important to debrief participants after this type of activity. Allow them the opportunity to come out of character and reflect on the exercise. 5. The facilitator explains the rules of the role play and asks for feedback on the following types of questions. What are your thoughts on this activity? What did you like? What didn't you like? What lessons, if any, have we learned from this activity? Should we judge other cultures by our own standards? What problems does that pose? Are there any times when we should judge other cultures? What changes would you make to this activity? Note, allow plenty of time for participants to provide feedback. Practical exercise for young people. 9. Reflecting back. Objectives. 1. To allow participants to reflect on their learning. 2.to. Involve all participants in sharing their personal reactions. Time, 20 minutes. Materials, paper and pens, small box. Facilitators' notes. 1. Ask participants to sit in a circle. 2. Ask each person to write on a piece of paper their thoughts and feelings about the learning that has taken place. Ask them to focus specifically on the content of what they have learned rather than the process. These thoughts should be anonymous. 3. Each person puts their piece of paper into the box. The facilitator then randomly picks out a piece of paper and shares what is on it. Discussion should take place around what is on the paper. Note, there are a number of different ways to achieve these objectives. Alternative forms of this activity include big circle, small circle. In this form, participants discuss in small groups what has taken place, and then choose one person to report back to the larger group. Just the big circle. In this form, participants share their reactions openly, as part of the larger circle. It is important that all participants are allowed to speak, and that respect is given to each person during their turn.